Chapter 7. God help me. I've finally seen it for myself. God help us all. They lied to us. Dr. Robinson and the Umbrella people held a press conference at the hospital just this morning, and they damn near insisted that there's no need to panic, that the cases being called in were isolated events, that the victims were suffering from the flu, not, according to them, the so-called cannibal disease that the stars were going on about in July, in spite of what a few paranoid citizens are now saying. Chief Irons was there too. He backed the docs up and reiterated his views on the defunct stars' incompetence. Case closed, right? Nothing to worry about. We were on our way back to the office from the press conference south on Cole Street, and there was a commotion holding up traffic, a couple of stopped cars and a gathering crowd. No cops on the scene. I thought it was some minor accident and started to back up, but Dave wanted to get a few shots. He still had 2 rolls of film left from the hospital. What the hell? We got out and suddenly people were running, screaming for help, and we saw 3 pedestrians down the middle of the street, and there was blood everywhere. The attacker was young, barely 20, white male. He was straddling an older man, and my hands are shaking. I don't know how to say it. I don't want to say it, but it's my job. People have to know. I can't let this get to me. He was eating one of the older man's eyes. The other 2 victims were dead, slaughtered, an elderly woman and a younger one, both of them with bloody throats and faces. The younger woman's abdomen had been ripped open. It was chaos, total hysteria, crying, shouting, even some crazy laughter. Dave snapped 2 pics and then threw up on himself. I wanted to do something. I did. But those people were already dead, and I was afraid. The young man slurped away, digging his fingers into the man's other eye, seemingly oblivious to everything else. He was actually moaning like he couldn't get enough. Gore all over him. We heard the sirens and backed off along with everyone else. Most people left, but a few stayed, pale and sick and frightened. I got the story from a chubby shopkeeper who couldn't stop wringing his hands, though there wasn't much else to tell. The kid apparently just wandered onto the street and grabbed a woman, started biting her. The shopkeeper said the woman's name was Joelle something or other, and she was walking with her mother, a Mrs. Murray. The shopkeeper didn't know her first name. Mrs. Murray tried to stop the attack, and the kid turned on her. A couple of men tried to help, jumping the kid, and he managed to get one of them too. After that, nobody tried to help anymore. The cops showed up, and before they even looked at the mess in the street, at the freak show kid lunching on his fellow man, they cleared and secured the scene. 3 squad cars surrounded the attacker, blocking him from view. The shopkeeper was actually told to close up and go home along with the rest of us. When I told one of the officers that Dave and I were with the press, he confiscated Dave's camera, said it was evidence, which is total and utter bullshit, like they have a right. Listen to me. Worried about freedom of the press at this point. It doesn't matter. At 4 o'clock this afternoon, 1 hour ago, Mayor Harris declared martial law. Blockades have been set up all over the place, and we've been cut off from the outside. According to Harris, the city's been quarantined so that the unfortunate illness that is plaguing some of our citizens won't spread. He wouldn't call it the cannibal disease, but there's obviously no question. And according to our police scanner, the attacks are multiplying exponentially. I believe that it already may be too late for all of us. The disease isn't airborne, or we'd all have it, but the evidence strongly suggests that you get it when you're bitten by one of them, just like in the movies I used to watch on the Double Creature feature when I was a boy. That would explain the incredible growth rate of the attacks, but it also tells me that unless the cavalry comes in very soon, we're all going to die, one way or another. The cops have closed down the press, but I'm going to try to get the word out anyway, even if I have to go door to door. Dave, Tom, Kathy, Mr. Bradson, everyone else has gone home to be with their families. They don't care about letting the people know anymore. but it's all I have left. I don't want to... I just heard glass breaking downstairs. Somebody's coming. There wasn't any more. Carlos lowered the crumpled sheets he found, placing them on the reporter's desk, his mouth a grim line. He'd killed 2 zombies in the hallway. Maybe one of them had been the writer. A distressing thought made all the worse by its application. How long had it taken for the writer to change? And if he's right about a disease, how long does Randy have? A police scanner and some kind of handheld radio sat on the countertop across the room. But suddenly all he could think of was Randy, downstairs and getting sicker, waiting for Carlos to come back. He'd held up pretty well so far, managing to crawl through 2 of the blockades with only a little help. But by the time they'd reached the Raccoon Press building, he'd hardly been able to stand up on his own. Carlos had left him propped up beneath a dead payphone on the first floor, not wanting to drag him up the stairs. A few small fires were smoldering on the lower landing, and Carlos had been afraid that Randy might trip and get burned. Which might be the least of his worries right now. Puta, what a balls up! Why didn't they tell us what we were getting into? Carlos choked down the despair that question raised. It was something he could take up with the proper authorities once they got out of here. He'd probably end up being deported, since he was only in the country through Umbrella, but so what? At the moment, going back to his old life sounded like a picnic. He hurried to the radio equipment and switched the scanner on, not sure what to do next. He'd never used one, and his only experience with 2-way radios was a set of walkie-talkies he once played with as a kid. 200-channel multiband was written on the top of the scanner, and there was actually a scan button. He'd pushed it and watched a small digital readout flash meaningless numbers at him. Except for a few static bursts and clicks, nothing happened. Great. That's real helpful. The radio was what he wanted anyway, and it at least looked like a walkie-talkie, though it said AM SSB transceiver on the side. He picked it up, wondering if there were channels, or if there was some memory control button, and heard footsteps out in the hall, slow, dragging footsteps. He dropped the radio on the counter and hefted his assault rifle, turning toward the door that opened into the hallway, already recognizing the shuffling, aimless steps of a zombie. The large newspaper office was the only room on the second floor. Unless he wanted to jump out a window, the hall and stairs were the only way out. He'd have to kill it to get back to... Oh shit. It had to go past Randy. What if it got to him? What if it was Randy? Please, no, he whispered, but once the possibility occurred to him, he couldn't not think about it. He backed across the room, feeling sweat slide down the back of his neck. The footsteps continued, getting closer, and what was that limp he heard, the sound of one foot dragging? Please don't be... I don't want to have to kill him. The footsteps paused just outside the door, and then Randy Thomas lurched into view, his expression blank and free of pain, strings of drool hanging from his lower lip. Randy? Stop there, mano, okay? Carlos heard his voice break with dismal fear. Say something, okay? Randy? A kind of dread acceptance filled Carlos as Randy tilted his head toward him and continued forward, raising his arms. A low, gurgling moan erupted from his throat, and it was the loneliest sound Carlos thought he'd ever heard. Randy didn't really see him, didn't understand what he was saying. Carlos had become food, nothing more. Lo siento mucho, he said, and again in English, in case there was any part of Randy left. I'm sorry. Sleep now, Randy. Carlos aimed carefully and fired, looking away as soon as he saw the grouping holes appear just above Randy's right eyebrow, hearing but not seeing his comrade's body hit the floor. For a long time he simply stood, shoulders slumped as he gazed at his own boots, wondering how he'd gotten tired so fast, and telling himself there was nothing else he could have done. At last he walked over and picked up the radio, hitting the switch and thumbing the send control. "This is Carlos Oliveira, member of Umbrella's UBCS team, Squad Alpha, Platoon Delta. I'm at the Raccoon City newspaper office. Can anyone hear me? We were cut off from the rest of the platoon, and now I need help. Request immediate assistance. If you can hear this, please respond." Nothing but static. Maybe he needed to try specific channels. He could go through them one by one and just keep repeating the message. He turned the radio over, looking at all the buttons, and saw stamped into the backing, "Range 5 miles. Which means I can call anybody in town. How useful. Except nobody's gonna answer, because they're dead, like Randy, like me." Carlos closed his eyes, trying to think, trying to feel anything like hope. And he remembered Trent. He checked his watch, realizing how crazy this was, thinking that it was the only thing that made sense anymore. Trent had known. He'd known what was going on, and he told Carlos where to go when the shit came down. Without Randy to think about, and with no clear path out of town, Grill 13, Carlos had just over an hour to find it. Jill had just reached the STARS office when the communication console at the back of the room crackled to life. She slammed the door behind her and ran to it, words spitting out through a haze of static. "It's Carlos. Raccoon. We're cut off. Platoon. Help. Assistance. If you can hear, respond." Jill snatched up the headset and hit the transmit switch. "This is Jill Valentine, Special Tactics and Rescue Squad. You're not coming in very clear. Please repeat. What's your location? Do you read me? Over." She strained to hear something, anything, and then she saw the light over the transmit relay switch wasn't on. She tapped several buttons and jiggled the switch, but the little green light refused to show itself. Damn it! She knew dick about communications, too. Whatever was broken, she wasn't going to be the one to fix it. Well, at least I'm not the only one up shit creek without a paddle. Sighing, Jill dropped the headset and turned to look at the rest of the office. Other than a few loose papers scattered on the floor, it looked the same as always. A few desks cluttered with files, PCs, and personal items, some overloaded shelves, a fax machine, and behind the door, the tall reinforced steel gun safe that she hoped to God wasn't empty. That thing out there isn't going to die easy. That STARS killer. She shivered, feeling the knot of fear in her lower belly clench and grow heavier. Why it hadn't broken down the doors and killed her, she didn't know. It was easily strong enough. Just thinking about it made her want to crawl into a dark place somewhere and hide. It made the few zombies she'd passed on her way through the building seem as dangerous as infants. Not true, of course, but after seeing what that tyrant thing did to Brad... Jill swallowed hard and pushed it out of her mind. Dwelling on it wasn't going to help. Time to get to business. She stepped to her desk, randomly thinking that when she'd last sat there, she'd been a totally different person. It seemed like a lifetime had gone by since then. She opened the top drawer and started to dig, and there, behind a box of paper clips, was a set of tools she'd always kept at the office. Yes! She opened the small cloth bundle and unrolled it, looking over the picks and torsion bars with a practiced eye. Sometimes having grown up as the daughter of a professional thief paid off big. She'd been having to shoot at locks for the last few days, which wasn't nearly as easy or safe as people seemed to think. Having a decent lockpick set along would be an enormous help. Besides which, I don't have the key for the gun safe, but then that never stopped me before. She'd practiced when no one was around just to see if she could do it, and had experienced very little trouble. The safe was ancient. Jill crouched in front of the door, inserted the bar and pick, and gently felt for the tumblers. In less than a minute she was rewarded for her efforts. The heavy door swung open, and there, in plain sight, was the stainless steel answer to at least one of her recent prayers. "Bless you, Barry Burton," she breathed, lifting the heavy revolver off the otherwise empty lower shelf. A Colt Python, .357 Magnum, 6-shot with a swing-out cylinder. Barry had been the weapons specialist for the Alpha team and was a total gun nut besides. He'd taken her shooting several times, always insisting that she try out one of his Colts. He had 3 that she knew of, all different calibers, but the .357 packed the biggest wallop. That he'd left it behind, either by mistake or on purpose, seemed like a miracle, as did the 20-plus rounds in a box on the floor of the safe. There weren't any shotgun shells, but there was 1 magazine's worth of 9mm rounds loose in one of the drawers. Worth the trip at least, and with the pics I can go through the downstairs evidence room now, check for confiscated materials. Things were looking up. Now all she had to do was sneak out of the city in the dark, avoiding zombies, violent, genetically altered animals, and a tyrant creature that had proclaimed itself Nemesis to the stars. A Nemesis made for her. Amazingly, the thought made her smile. Add an impending explosion and some bad weather to the mix, she'd have herself a party. "We," she said softly, and started to load the Magnum with ends that weren't quite steady. It hadn't been for a long time.